GLOBIS.
Okay, thanks a lot for joining the session. I know this is after lunch. I'm sure you had a great bento lunch and exciting discussion during it. I know this is usually a challenging time of the day, especially for international travelers who may have a jet lag, but we'll rise up to the challenge and make it a really exciting session. So this panel focuses on the next for the Technovate era. Technovate, as I'm sure you are all familiar, means it's a combined word between technology and innovation. And technology and innovation have brought great things to our lives. Productivity improvement, just general wellness, and many other things. But it also seems to have some problems, especially nowadays. With the climate change, threat of AI, maybe cybersecurity, and rising inequality, maybe among societies. So in this panel, we will talk both on the benefits of the Technovate and also some of the issues that's facing Technovate, and also try to address how to have a sustainable innovation in the next era. We have very, very distinguished guests coming from all over the world. With very diverse background, and I feel very privileged to be able to ask them questions, and they have to answer my questions. And I will be extending that privilege to you towards the end of the session by opening up to the Q&A. I want to have at least 15 or 20 minutes for the Q&A. So with that, I would like to start with the bright side of the Technovate by asking each panelist, maybe starting with Arun.
Why don't I go last?
Okay, you can go last. So Isaac?
I'll go first on the other question.
Okay, so I'll start with Isaac by asking, what's the most exciting tech trend that you are seeing, either in your region, in your case Israel, or in the field of expertise of yours? And hopefully, I'm going to challenge the panelists by asking them to state something that audiences don't already know.
Thank you for inviting me here. What are the most three ones you said? Okay. During my life in Israel, I was, in a way, I played a central role in three revolutions. One is space technology, I mean real space with satellites. Second one is cybersecurity, which I had the pleasure of submitting to the government more than 10 years ago, a plan how to make Israel one of the top 5 countries in the world in cybersecurity technology. And June a year and 2 months ago, I got the same mission from the Prime Minister of doing it with AI, artificial intelligence. In a way, the second and third one are related. I mean, it's all about computers at the end of the day. It's more than ICT, I mean, but it's still on computers and take communication between computers. I don't have to tell you that there is something called Moore's Law. They become more and more powerful in a rate like this. The rate of change is huge, and therefore we have every one of us are dependent on computers. On one hand, we still want to make it even more efficient, and on the other hand, we become more dependent on this. So there are problems to take care of, like security, and there are more potentials. And if you ask me what is the most promising one, is I think undoubtedly the artificial intelligence, which brings with it a lot of questions, because we don't have yet as intelligent machines as human beings, but we are approaching it very fast. And then we will have all the problems that we have with human beings. I mean, how can I count on you? How do I know that you do whatever I educated you to do? And things like this. And people think it's a problem of AI. It's not a problem of AI. It's a problem of intelligence or intelligent machines, including human beings. But this is the most exciting one.
Okay, thank you. I'll follow up with you with more questions later on. Let's move on to Yuan.
Yeah. So since I'm based in China, Shanghai, so I'd like to share with you some of the new development in China. And from the outside world, we are admiring a lot the big platforms like Alibaba and Tencent. But if you talk within China with my executive student, many of entrepreneurs, I think we are entering into a new era really in China. On one side, you see that the game is very open. Recently, you know, there are some huge companies grow out of crack, like Pinduoduo and others. So that shows the inspiration for many of the new generation of Chinese entrepreneurs to move into this area, given the huge user base in China. And once you develop some niche market strategy, you can disrupt the big elephant in a generic platform strategy. So there's some big debate and changes in this area. On the other side, if you look back to the success story of JD.com or Alibaba, they're mainly based on the low financialization of the Chinese people and the poorly developed logistic and distribution channel in China. That was the key bottleneck that they break down. And now, unfortunately for them, that the rent or the dividend from that further improvement is very limited. Because now in China, basically all over mainland China, you can receive your parcel within the day or 24 hours. In the very extremely remote area, 2 days. So basically the way you further improve warehouse, it's not very exciting anymore. However, I heard recently, I joined some of debate, closed door debate among our entrepreneur executives. They are more talking about to turn around this new situation of monopoly, because we have the author of this monopoly book, but now it will become very soon the has been for the business model. Once you are sitting on a monopoly, the problem is that you are become a rank seeker, and once you are rank seeker, you are less innovative. You just want to take that rent, and for you the additional investment or the additional cost is close to zero. So like all the older elephant of telecommunication, or name them, and they all died. And now the people are talking more about one-to-one or one-to-multiple. So the technology now is allowed that to let individual supplier and the demand to meet together through internet, through a kind of super personalized one-to-one, one-to-multiple relationship. Technology is mature. Many of the Chinese, some of our executive students, they are working on that to disrupt totally the platform. The platform will become useless. Basically, your personal digital assistant will talk with the other personal digital assistant to find a solution directly. Why we need Alibaba or Tencent to deal with. So there are a lot of course, the people, when I talk with the Alibaba people and Tencent people, they are aware of that. They are scared to death. So the only way they are doing is to go violently to buy all the possible new emergent seeds as their investment and try to absorb them. But I'm sure that something will happen very soon. In the next 3-5 years, you will see some big changes in the scenery of the e-commerce market, that the one-to-multiple, one-to-one will become the theme instead of the platform we see nowadays. Or some more specialized niche market platform that will emerge to disrupt also the generic huge mammoth strategy platform. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yuan. I'm going to follow up later on with you regarding the dominant platform players and who might be the ones who disrupt those players. But now for Miku.
Hello, everyone. Very nice meeting you. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm Miku, the founder and CEO of Cinnamon, which is a business AI company. So I should talk about AI, right? So as everyone knows, China and US has a lot of advantage in AI. and Japan is a lot behind, unfortunately. But actually, we have only one thing that we are #1 in the world. So that's business AI. There are four AI categories, and one is internet AI, like Mercari or Facebook or Amazon, TikTok, that kind of very closed service, internet service. So they use tons of machine learning and deep learning in their service. That's internet AI. And the other is perception AI. That is, for example, security camera is finding a strange person here, for example. And the third one is autonomous AI, which is, for example, self-drive AI speaker. So in these three categories, US and China are a lot more advanced, but only in business AI, Japan is the #1. So business AI is increasing productivity for office workers. So I have seen one interesting graph, but a ranking. And interestingly, Japan is the most inefficient country. And I guess this is one of the reasons that Japan is a lot advanced in business AI. So for example, we have a sales branch in the US, but actually in US, they are still doing POC, proof of concept. But in Japan, not only us, but also other AI companies, enterprise has already started to use AI even today. So Japan is a lot more advanced. So I'm feeling that, when we did POC was 1 to 2 years ago. So Japan is maybe 1.5 years ahead to the US. And in terms of China, it is kind of difficult for us to find even competitors. So, but it is kind of challenging to say this next to a Chinese professor. But yeah, so China is very strong and fast people. So we need to do ganbaranai to. But yeah, Japan is Japan is now #1 in business AI. So we should be proud of it.
Thank you, Miku. I think I will follow up with you later on in terms of I think some of the products that you are building is workplace AI. So you are automating some of the tasks that's usually be done manually. And what might be the next task in the workplace that will be transformed by AI? So I'll ask that later on. Okay. But before that, let's go with Arun.
Okay, thank you. Before I answer, I'm going to take a picture of all of you. I hope you don't mind. I feel like panelists get their pictures taken too much, and you guys are so good looking. This is also, if any of you are jet lagged and sleeping, this is a good time to wake up. So yeah.
Is that a perception AI too?
Yes. There's facial recognition software in here that is telling me who all of you are. So I've studied digital technologies for a couple of decades, and it's been a good time to be studying digital technologies, and there've been a ton of exciting things that we've seen, right? I mean, that my fellow panelists have spoken about. And of course, in sort of in the realm of AI and at least in the realm of consumer AI, I saw this really interesting technology from Ping An, the sort of large Chinese insurance company that would sort of, based on your retinal scan, give you a diagnosis of different things that so you might be vulnerable to. And so I certainly see a lot of excitement there. I feel like if when I come for the Olympics next year, if I see Toyota's flying car light the Olympic torch, as sort of they have promised, that would be my answer to sort of the most exciting innovation that I've seen. But in sort of the prospects of what are the most exciting innovations that I see on the horizon, the two that are most exciting to me, neither of them is in the digital realm at this point. I mean, one is the gene editing technology that sort of the genesis from CRISPR-Cas9. I'm seeing progress there that sort of combines it with nanorobot technology to sort of increase its precision. And I feel that could really revolutionize, what is innovation sort of is a drive towards improving like, the aspirations of humans, right? And if we can sort of dramatically raise the quality of diagnostics and sort of like, of treatment through sort of like, gene editing that is precise, I mean, I think that would be sort of hugely exciting. Another technology that I'm finding hugely exciting is the meat growing technology. Like, sort of laboratory meat where, like, rather than creating animals and then slaughtering them to produce meat, you can sort of take the tendon of a cow and actually in the lab sort of produce steaks and burgers and so on. In terms of its impact on the world and its potential to actually sort of keep people fed as sort of more and more people become able to afford meat, I think that's sort of a potentially far more exciting technology to me than sort of a foldable phone or I'm deeply excited about the next generation of platforms as well. I've spent a lot of my time studying them, but these two seem like fundamentally potentially more important to me than any of the digital innovation that I'm seeing.
Can you taste the difference? The artificial meat and the regular meat?
I haven't tasted it yet. I've tasted the non-meat based meat, and I can tell the difference. But I think if you gave me enough time, I would probably prefer over time. We like meat because we've been eating meat, so I think we can be trained to sort of like the other meat as sort of either the fake meat or the lab-grown meat as sort of. I think the challenge now is the cost structure. I mean, it costs a lot more to grow the meat in a lab, but it's a disruptive technology, meaning that it is growing. It's sort of the cost of producing meat in the lab is falling at a far more rapid rate than the cost of producing meat the conventional way. So I think at some point those curves will meet, and we'll have a good good sustainable way of having our steaks.
Interesting. Miku, you mentioned that Japan is advanced in business AI. Can you give some of the examples, some of the AI used in the workplace right now, as well as some of the AI technology that might be used, for example, 3 or 5 years down the road?
Okay, so yeah, up till last year, most of our projects were cost down. And quite recently, we are getting more projects in getting more revenue or more profitable. But for example, in terms of cost saving, for example, our projects was replacing data entry work for insurance companies or banks, or to find knowledge for manufacturers. But for example, for these days, to get the project for making it profitable or increasing the revenue, for example, for a security company, they have so many of sales guys, but for a sales manager, it is not very visible of what they're doing. So to visualize what they are talking and classify what they are talking with their customer, and then to find the gap between good sales guys and low performers, and then to show recommendation to low performers like that. And in total, currently, most of our clients are big enterprise, and that happens not only us, but also all over the world. So now only big enterprise can use AI because it takes so much money to make for now. And still, AI is a little bit more primitive compared to IT. So you need to customize a lot if you really want to use AI. So currently, SMEs or individuals are not affordable to use AI, but I'm pretty sure in 3 years or 5 years, SME will start using AI, and after that, of course, individuals will start using AI.
Okay, Isaac, I want to ask you a question on cybersecurity because you're the expert in cybersecurity. I just attended the session earlier about cybersecurity, and it kind of made me worried because the threat seems to be very real. Can you shed a light on how worried we should be in terms of cyber attacks, and what are the latest trends in cybersecurity?
Well, in the past, people used to think about cybersecurity as a technology that enables you to secure your computer. This is secure the information that is stored in this computer. And for the last 10, 15 years, it's not really the main threat. It's still a threat to IT. But the main threat is having physical damage caused by a malware, a malignant software that is put in those computers that are controlling one of our vital critical systems, like healthcare system, like power production, like transportation, trains, etc. These all are, in modern countries, are controlled by computers. And once someone will find a way to hack into these computers and change the software, then we may have crash between two trains, aircraft falling from the sky, and things like this, which are much more severe than damage to the virtual space. Still, it's a computer technology which can still be fought with other anti-computer technologies, like anything in our life, and you need to, at the end of the day, there will be some balance between them. Give you one example. In Israel, in order to minimize the conflict between security, I'm speaking now about cybersecurity, between cybersecurity and human rights, because if you want a good cybersecurity system, you have to monitor the network and everything that runs in the network, and then you may violate the privacy of people, intercepting private messages, etc. In order to minimize this conflict, we introduced 5, 6 years ago machine learning, machines that learn the traffic and intercept malware, not by going to the level of content, decoding the bits and going to the level of content, but by detecting anomalies, what we call, in the traffic of the bits before they are decoded. Okay? Once we did it, we succeeded very much in discovering malware without the need to go to the content, without violating the privacy. But then the bad guys, and there are always bad guys on the other side of something, the bad guys found that we are using machines to do it, so they developed other learning machines that will learn how our machines are protecting our system and deceive those machines. And we are now in a kind of AI vs. AI. I guess it will go forever, but it's not hopeless. I mean, until now, for the last, I have to knock on the wood, but for the last, let's say, 20 years or so, we didn't have any major attack on Israel which succeeded in cyberspace.
And it's sort of interesting, right? I mean, that, this kind of adversarial classification that, has been sort of going on, I guess, since spam detection, right? I mean, I think that was one of the early examples of this sort of, the bad guys trying to fool the good guys, and then, it's sort of becoming a game. But what worries me most about the cyber threat is that it changes the geopolitical power balance, right, in a couple of different ways. I mean, one is, it used to be you need an air force, a standing army, a navy, in order to sort of really pose a military threat. If you want to sort of take out someone's airport, sort of bring down their power grids, take over their communication systems, sort of wage war. Now it can be done with sort of advanced expertise in digital technology, so that on the one hand gives military-like power to sort of smaller players who may be non-state players, but it also gives power to the large technology companies that are more advanced than most governments in their capabilities. They may not be using these capabilities. Google may not be actually sort of developing cyber warfare capabilities, but they have the expertise that is perhaps more advanced than most nation state governments. And I think 10, 20 years from now, this is going to change the geopolitical landscape in terms of the balance of power between countries and corporations.
Well, if I may, I beg to differ. There is only one
That's
change.
wonderful.
This is the rate of change. This is the only difference. Because even before, you said before we had airplanes, aircraft, etc. I mean, who built those aircraft? Again, it was a monopoly of very few companies all over the globe, both sides of the globe, not only the American. And it was a monopoly, and they had huge power over government, those companies. The only difference really is that the rate of change is very fast. It's
Well,
so fast that it doesn't give time to the other side or to the rivals of this conflict to get acquainted with the threat and to develop the right answer from their side. But and it's so fast. I mean, now I'm speaking about a matter of typical time constant will be months, not years. You mentioned, for example, DNA editing or meat, which are very important to our life, but they are developed for years. And time constant is totally different when you speak about this cyberspace, and it makes a lot of difference, including, by the way, in politics. The very fact that you can, in one push of a button, go to hundreds of millions of people. You don't need any more parties. You don't need any more the political tools that we used to.
See, I don't disagree
only
that we've
difference.
always had big military suppliers. I guess the point I'm getting to is that it's not just the power balance between the suppliers of the technology and the governments as buyers. It's more that the entities that sort of we think of as tech companies have expanded the scope of their societal influence, right? I mean, like Facebook is backing a currency, Google is providing disaster relief after a hurricane. Our sensors, our algorithms, there's all these societal functions that have already been taken over by platforms, but now with the cybersecurity threat, you're adding the sort of the military power dimension to that. And so as we get to sort of talking about regulation, it'll sort of become clear that it's very hard to think about regulating a company that has military-like power or when you have this kind of dependence on them.
Yes, Yuan.
Yeah, I'd like to add one additional dimension to what Isaac and Aaron just mentioned. The difference between the current model and the old model with some dominant ARM producer. But the real issue nowadays is really about this technology interlink and the deep global supply chain. So that makes the situation even more complex. Before that, the Germans, they have their superb aircraft all made piece by piece in Germany. The US, they have their one. The UK, they have their own one. But these days, you see that all the technology, both on the software and the hardware, they're deeply integrated. So the current dispute between China and the US on the company like Huawei makes the situation very clear. Is that both on the hardware and software, people are just connected. So it makes even more difficult to stop and to decouple. Now it's a very fashionable word. And also another big problem within that we don't...
Divorce rates are going up.
Yeah, we don't have the level, the enough level for the trust in order to integrate further. But we have no courage or no interest to move back. So we stay somewhere in the middle for that technology and innovation.
Yuan, I want to dig deep on that, the point that platform players are becoming more dominant and they're widening their scope. I think that's happening not only in China with BAT and ByteDance, also happening in the US with Facebook, Apple, Google, and everyone. Do you think that's a problem, that those dominant players are basically buying up the challenger startups and become more dominant? And it seems like they have stopped becoming challengers. They're becoming like incumbents who are being afraid of being disrupted.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. And if you look at these big players these days, you have to take into consideration different factors. And globally speaking, you see that now the geopolitical and the political factors are becoming upfront, even in US. that the government authorities are jump in to regulate the market. The Europeans started first, now Americans are doing the same way. But in a situation, if you compare the situation in Europe or in US with the situation in China, you see a fundamental difference. In other countries, people will put the negotiation on the table, and there will be a bargaining, more or less transparent bargaining between the corporate and the authorities. In China, the situation is very different. It's more, I call it more like a dummy variable. So if you talk with the 0 or 1, 0 or 1. So if you talk with the Chinese big players, actually they worry a lot on many issues. Because in China, for the corporate world, it's very clear. As long as you stay useful and harmless, you can live. But the day that the government feels that you are threatening the social stability defined in a very Chinese wild way, then you will be disrupted overnight. So that makes this company very scary in the sense that how they can get closer, but not too closer with the state. So it's a very difficult waltz dancing in China. And the size and the impact you just mentioned of this company is, of course, it's their achievement, but it's also their threat against their future existence. So in China, it's a very controversial situation they are facing. They can go further mighty, but by doing that, they are also creating the problem for themselves.
Arun, how's the case in the U.S.? Those big platform players, they don't have that state interference. It seems. Do they continue to become dominant players, or what do you think?
Well, I think that there's sort of a different kind of dance between the government and the platforms in the U.S. I'm particularly interested in how that dynamic will evolve in China over the next 5 years, because although I agree completely with you, and you clearly understand sort of like the sort of the corporate government dynamics in China better than I do, but it also seems to me that China has never experienced this kind of new private player of this scale and this kind of potential social influence. And so, the government has humans in it at the end of the day. And so the power dynamics may change over time as these companies grow in their scale. I mean, in the US, the dance is sort of the threat of regulation and then the platforms behaving well, right? I mean, this is sort of the game that has been set up in the US for the last few decades between companies and government, where the government threatens to, like the companies have sort of unfettered profit maximizing objectives. Then, like at some point, the government steps in and says, well, something has gone wrong, and ideally they threaten to regulate sort of in a draconian way, which then forces the company to include that in its objective function and change its sort of model of behavior in a way that sort of solves the problem in part. I mean, I remember this happening with Microsoft almost 20 years ago, where there was sort of an antitrust case against them. There was like this threat to break Microsoft up, to split up the Office and the Windows business. And it would seem to an observer from the distance that nothing really happened. But what really happened was that Microsoft was very cautious about getting into the mobile operating system space because of that ongoing antitrust case. And this sort of opened the door for, sort of the iOS, later for the Android system, for like a new generation of players to emerge. So I think we're going through a phase now with Facebook and Google, a little bit with Apple. I think Amazon will also perhaps face some sort of regulatory pushback. And I think what this does is it gives them pause about the aggressiveness with which they might enter a new industry. It also gives them pause about balancing profits with sort of consumer interest. And then that sort of opens the door for innovators to come in, and it also sort of restores balance a little.
I want to shift gears by asking any of the panelists. So we are very well aware of the benefits of the Technovate, but there also seems to be the downside of it. Some people argue that As technology and innovation accelerates, it exacerbates the income gap, the inequality. What's your view on that? And if it's exacerbating the inequality, what should we do about it?
Yeah, when I was teaching accounting a couple of years back, I don't teach that much anymore because of my job as admin. I always show the students a very interesting ratio is very simple ratio. You take a listed company, the market capitalization, divided by the number of employees. If this number is very small, that company is a great contributor to the middle class emergence and the contribution or equality of wealth in the country. So if you take that measure, you see a lot of old elephant like Walmart, they are actually contributing the middle class emergence in US. However, now if you apply the same ratio to all the tech companies, you see a problem, is that actually they can use a very small number of employees but create a huge market capitalization. And of course, by doing that, they are creating more problems in the sense that once you become the platform, so what you will do is try to squeeze to death to the users on your platform, because once you create the stickiness, you can charge the rent. And once you charge the rent, actually the Uber drivers, they live worse off than a chauffeur drivers. So, et cetera, you continue with that. And now we see some problems in China. So I heard today again about the insensitivity of Chinese users about the privacy. So I think that was a fact maybe 1 or 2 years ago, but now the situation is changing dramatically. For one reason is that people all of a sudden realize the problem. So you need some scandal, some problems to realize that. Of course, the first big problem we had was 2 years ago during the summer times. 2 girls got raped and killed thanks to the DD platform, because actually the criminals, they identified the beautiful girls to rape and to kill. So because of the information sharing to drivers to attract people in on the supply side, because they don't earn any money from giving the right, so they have to earn something from it. So there are a lot of debate on that, and recently, if you follow the news in China, but also a little bit in the Wall Street Journal or New York Times, they are talking about a big unicorn in China called Mo, and they created a face wrapping app called Zao, and they are running into problem because the user term was basically give all the user their right away for life, something like this. So there's a lot of debate in China. Also because of the decreasing marginal contribution from the platform to the supply side also, because if you were the first one start a Taobao store on Alibaba platform, you can actually become a millionaire quite quickly, sitting in the inland province to China to sell some of your local goods to Shanghai. But now since you have thousands of the similar stores, and of course they are charging a good fee, for you the marginal contribution of that store is limited. So now there are some disruptive one-to-one or one-to-multiple models. So some people, they don't open any store anymore. They try to create a group of interests in WeChat. So far it's still free. So you can create a group of interests. I just share with one very successful store because my professor, they wrote a case on it. Actually, is a fisherman. So normally the fisherman, you sell the fish to the store, but now what they do is that they create a WeChat group with some very well-off people in Shanghai, families, so they can buy the fish directly from the boat. And they cut everything. There's no more platform between. So the fishermen directly to the client. And they use the wonderful SF delivery during the day. And of course, if you can recommend the store to some others, you can get your delivery for free, for example. So just by doing that, they create artificially a store without having the online or offline facility, without passing by this platform. So it started.
So I'm gonna, I agree with everything that you've said, but I'm gonna sort of present the counterpoint in some sense, which is, disagreeing with the premise that technological progress increases inequality. I think that if I had to argue the opposite, I would focus on 2 points. I mean, one is that you can't just look at employees in the company. You also have to look at people who are earning a living. And Uber drivers and DD drivers, we certainly need government intervention that gives them sort of a little more of the return. But take Airbnb hosts. I mean, there are over 5 million Airbnb hosts. They are running small businesses through the platform. They are certainly sort of Airbnb takes like 15%. Take the millions of Amazon sellers. They are starting to get squeezed, but still, I mean, in thinking about what is the sort of the labor market impact of a platform, we have to sort of take into consideration the millions of small businesses that are possible because they can advertise on Google or Facebook, the millions of hosts on Airbnb, the millions of sellers on Amazon and Taobao. And the other counter-argument, I think, has to do with our currency of inequality, the definition of how we're measuring inequality. I think there's no dispute in many countries that income and wealth inequality have been rising over the last couple of decades. But if you think about overall quality of life inequality, I grew up mostly in India. It used to take like 3 years to get a telephone when I was a kid. I lived in a relatively small town for a few years, and we were one of 3 families who owned a television. And so all my friends would come over to watch television with me. I'm not that old, I just lived in a small town. Now, if I look at India today, and I look at access to video entertainment, inequality has gone down dramatically. Hundreds of millions of people have access to streaming video entertainment. If I look at inequality and access to communications technology, hundreds of millions of people have their own phone, right? I mean, so on these metrics, maybe video entertainment, Bollywood and cricket and making phone calls aren't the most important metrics. But I think as the platform businesses that that were alluded to earlier start to sort of enter other spheres of life, healthcare, energy, sort of sanitation, access to water. My belief is that on those metrics, quality of life inequality will start to go down because of technological progress, and in particular because of digital progress.
Okay, so before I open up the floor to Q&A, I want to ask last question to perhaps Isaac and Miku on the policy recommendation. What are if you are the policy, if you can make any policy, what are the one thing that you recommend to accelerate innovation and make sure the wealth of innovation is shared by all?
I said before that the main characteristic of these digital technologies is the rate of change. By the way, it applies also to the recent discussion here. I agree with both of you, but the only difference is the rate of change. I mean, technology always changed the composition of professions in society, but it was relatively slowly and we could adopt to it. Now it happens so fast that people feel hurt by it. The same, I would say here. I mean, because technology is running so fast, I don't think that the government can play any substantial role in creating it. The role of the policy, okay, overall, this is what the government should, the rules of behavior of the government, okay, should be to let technology run as fast as it develops by itself and regulate only certain applications. When it becomes mature enough and certain application, you have to then to regulate it, otherwise it will be a jungle and not a normal society. Then you have to, meantime, what the government has to do is, first of all, to create mechanisms that will enable technology developing, and technology usually is developed from bottom up. I mean, it comes from usually young minds, not as old as mine, You should acknowledge it and let it go by itself and encourage it. And secondly, remove all these obstacles that block innovation. One of them is too much regulation at early stages. I'm not against regulation overall, but not at early stages. Then it will be disastrous. We will stay still in caves.
Okay, thanks. So recommendation is to clear the obstacles and regulation, especially at the early stage technologies. And Miku, you're the only entrepreneur on this panel. So as an entrepreneur representative, what will be your policy recommendation?
So it's more like AI side, but it's like GDPR. So individuals or small companies can protect your data. So now GAFA, that can become big, huge companies have so much of data. But I'd like you to know transfer learning, which is one of the cutting edge AI now. So transfer learning is a technology that can adapt one AI to another knowledge. So for example, if you make an AI for example, supermarket, you can adapt that knowledge to, for example, medical. So before, as you know, deep learning needs to have tons of training data. So deep learning is a very innovative technology, but you need to have millions of training data, which costs so much money and time to prepare. But if you use transfer learning, you do not have to so much data. Of course, to make the main AI, you need lots of data, but to adapt to it another category, you don't need that much. Maybe hundreds of training data is fine, which is very feasible. So this technology is key to the data. So before, huge tech giants tend to keep so much of data, but transfer learning and policy that individuals or small companies protect your data, I guess those GAFA will lose their power. So that is my recommendation.
Okay, thanks. So with that, I would like to open up the floor for the questions. And I think we'll take 3 or 4 at the same time. Any questions? So gentlemen here, and also Alan, and Yamagi-san.
Tatsuya Terza from METI. Currently, the GAFA seems to be invincible, but IBM at one time was considered to be invincible, only to be challenged by Microsoft. Microsoft seemed to be invincible, but it was challenged by the GAFA. Currently, GAFA seems to be invincible. Do you see any challenges above the horizon to challenge their dominance?
Okay, thanks. And Alan?
Alan Meyer, December. My question is from our guest from China. And I don't see any possibility for a regulatory policy agenda to control unbridled, uncontrolled, potentially disastrous technology development in the West. I think China is the only government that's still new enough, coming from a tightly controlled state society, transitioning to capitalist society, and still has the kind of concern about its citizenry that Japan has. And I'm wondering if you believe China may be able to develop a balanced agenda for regulation of technology, rapid technology development, to find a good social balance. And I'm hoping Japan can too, but I'm curious about China.
Okay, and the gentleman here.
My name is Hiroshi Kakuyama. I come from the pharma, Sumitomo Pharmaceutical. Yeah. Okay. So hi. So I have a question to the Hirano-san. I understand for some business AI is one of the strengths of the Japan, and maybe cost is less and make a time for the business. But how about is it still have a difficult to read the mainstream of the some AI or that kind of things? For example, to make a new product or a new system. Because if there's still have some difficulty, how could we solve this kind of things in the future?
Okay, thanks. Mainstream use of the AI. And Yamagi-san?
My name is Kotaro Yamagishi. I have a question to Professor Yuan Ding. Can you tell us what is going on in startup investment in China? Because I heard that the amount of money Chinese startup can raise is decreasing significantly in this year because Communist Party prohibit government or local government traditionally they are the largest investor for startups to stop investment.
Okay, and also I think we have two questions to Yuan. So maybe, does anyone have questions to Isaac? I'll take that one as well. We good? Okay, so so let's start with Miku on the common use of AI. And Arun, do you want to answer the GAFA question?
Mainstream, right? Okay, so the difficulties for to make new product for AI is there are two. One is the lack of AI talents, and the other is data. So in terms of AI researchers, there are only 300 to 500 AI researchers all over generation in Japan. So even if you want to make something in AI, you need to find AI researcher, which is super difficult. So that is one. And the second one is the data. So as I told you, transfer learning some other technologies, now you need less data than before, but still it is difficult to prepare data. So for example, even if you want to make maybe an AI solution for medical, you need to get data from medical. So for example, medical scanned images or whatever, like numbers, but still you cannot get it. So that's the difficulty, I think.
And Yuan, do you want to take the two questions on China?
Okay. So maybe I go with the second one first. I think it's a multiple factor contributing to the consequence you just mentioned. Actually, it's nothing to do with the government directly. Of course, government did something last year, was the deleveraging of Chinese economy, put a lot of pressure on the shadow banking, and also putting a lot of wealth Chinese people into difficulty because they also own some business in the real estate, shares in the listed company. So they got a kind of liquidity pressure on these people. So very little money new money went into the private equity VC fund investment. So that's the first factor. The second factor was related to the problem of the companies, because you had some very huge miracle happen, like the share bike burst, and also even the important Alipay Ant Finance. They didn't fulfill their growth target, so they had to stuck with the valuation. So that give a lot of pressure also on the investment fund, and they didn't deliver their promise, and people started to hesitate to pour new money into it. The third factor was related to the low performance of Chinese equity market, because there was a huge rosy perspectives of this pre-IPO investment. So actually the valuation was extremely high, expecting an even higher valuation in the secondary market, which is the equity market, and they didn't fulfill. So if you combine these three factors, that's why you saw the problems we had last year. Come to your question, it's a very sticky question, and I think it's more philosophical. Since I'm the dean of the most pro-market business school in China, our consensus is that, I totally agree with Isaac, is that the things are changing so quickly, and the government are so entrenched and short-sighted. So it's very difficult to count on the government to realize the ambitious regulation you just mentioned. Personally, I don't believe. That's my problem.
Isaac, you had a point?
Yeah, only one or two numbers to give you the food of thought. Okay, if you look at the total numbers of AI startups globally. We in Israel, we have, I don't know if you know, but we have 8 million people in Israel, 8 million, not 800 million. More or less 200 times less than China. We have almost 30% more AI startups in absolute numbers in Israel than in China. 30% more AI startups in Israel than in China, which is 200 times bigger. These different cultures, okay, and different political systems, and different governments and policies has a huge influence at the end. At the end of the day, if we talk about innovation, I'm not speaking about big industries or something like this, then it's different. If you speak about innovation, especially technological innovation, is one of those rare fields in which size doesn't matter. It's not about size. And it's not about the number of data sets that you have. It's about ideas, about special people that are hard to be found. They are everywhere. And the rest is the system around them. Does the system encourage them to develop these ideas? I'm speaking about the whole ecosystem. Or does it suppressing it? Thank you.
And for the GAFA question, I ask Arun.
Okay, I sort of agree with your premise, which is that I think you were saying, IBM was considered invincible, then came Microsoft. Microsoft was invincible, and then came the others. I think government regulation played some part. I think the emergence of some technological shift, right? I mean, the PC emerged, and that sort of led to Microsoft over IBM. Technology got consumerized, and it became a consumer technology. Microsoft was not a consumer company. Apple was a consumer company, and that was sort of another shift plus the regulation. So, if you think about two additional factors now, because you might say, well, now we've consumerized, what's next, right? I mean, you're at business consumer, there's nothing left. But there is, right? Because, you've seen Tencent emerge in the last few years. You've seen Didi emerge in the last few years. Perhaps even Uber. You might think of these as sort of next generation challengers because physical world and digital world are converging more in terms of what are the capabilities. This will cause hundreds of, maybe thousands or even thousands of traditional companies to make deep investments in becoming digital experts. And so this sort of, the total stock of sort of human talent that is looking at digital has sort of grown dramatically, right? And so even though Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, Huawei are big companies, they are perhaps small relative to as a fraction of both the talent and the market potential. I also think that, over the next few years, we'll see the 5G revolution play out. I'm actually, I feel that, Japan has a real opportunity here to sort of leapfrog and sort of take leadership in sort of the next generation of sort of 5G-enabled applications. But that will introduce a completely new way in which people interact with the physical world. And when you have that new kind of interaction, this will be new interfaces. And so, the story of technological progress has always been that as a company gets too big, it's unable to innovate because what made it big and successful makes it miss opportunities at the fringes. And so I don't think that fundamental has changed. So as we see sort of this 5G revolution play out and healthcare, sort of oil and gas exploration, energy, sort of food production start to become digitized, there's no doubt that there will be sort of companies that will succeed, like Facebook, Apple, Google, GAFA, BAT, and Huawei. Huawei always gets left out of that, in the in sort of being dominant companies in the future. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm sure you have more questions and comments, but let's do that over coffee break. We are running against time. Let's please join me in thanking the great panelists for sharing their insights and comments. Thank you a lot. Thank you.